We have to figure out what's going on first.
Icebergs falling off and drought and deaths of thousands of animals.
It is a doomsday scenario that there's absolutely no scientific evidence for.
To push to lower CO2 levels is in fact endangering the planet and life on it much more than any increase in CO2.
From the typical environmentalist perspective, the best environment is nature untouched by human hands. That's not a biblical understanding at all.
It's not enough simply to listen to the propaganda and believe it. We have to actually reason through it.
Coral Ridge Ministries and Answers in Genesis present Global Warming, a scientific and biblical expose of climate change.
Global warming is a popular phenomenon now because of the expressions of disaster that tend to come along with the story. And if you can show a story that has big icebergs falling off and drought and deaths of thousands of animals and so on, well, that's going to get the media's attention and certainly people's attention.
But with all the doomsday scenarios, what do scientists really know about global warming?
The simple answer on what is global warming is to say that the Earth's temperature has risen in the past 150 years. We've been able to measure that with thermometers.
There isn't anybody I know that doesn't agree that we are unusually warm right now.
But that's where the agreement among scientists ends.
Once you understand that the temperature is rising, the question is, well, why? And that is where a number of issues come to bear and opinions, because we cannot know for certain.
At this point, I think the research is too preliminary for us to say definitively what is causing global warming, even though I think it's fairly well established that it's happening.
Many of the measurements we have today with satellite and with surface temperature data on the ocean, these are only 30 years old. Even the measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, direct measurements, only go back to 1958. So that's why it's only been just in the last few years that we've been able to get measurements, direct measurements, that lead us to have more confidence there has been some change in temperature in the atmosphere.
As land use changes, climate changes too. If you build a city, the temperatures tend to go up. And so in a lot of places it looks like we're seeing global warming in the urban areas, and yet in rural areas there's not much at all. So this has been a big problem. But with the satellites measuring temperatures above the Earth's surface, it's really getting an unbiased, unfettered by land use change temperature trend. And now we have about 30 years of data, and it's very interesting and very valuable data.
This layer of atmosphere.
The most widely publicized theory, and the view presented in Al Gore's Oscar-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, is that greenhouse gases are largely to blame for the warming.
Greenhouse gases are gases that absorb energy in a certain part of the spectrum that keeps thermal or heat energy in the atmosphere. I think the simplest way to think about this is that if you were in a desert at night, you find that it gets very cold. If you're in the southeastern United States at night, say Florida or Alabama or somewhere, you'll find that the nighttime temperatures in the summer stay warm. Well, water vapor or humidity in the southeast is a greenhouse gas that keeps the heat in and doesn't allow it to escape at night.
Sunlight comes in, warms the Earth. But what most people don't realize is that for all of that sunlight coming in, there has to be an equal amount of infrared heat energy going back out to outer space. Now, the climate modelers claim that there's this fragile balance between the incoming sunlight and the outgoing infrared, and that when we add the CO2, we're upsetting that delicate balance.
CO2, or carbon dioxide, is the greenhouse gas that grabs most of the headlines.
They make it sound like it's that radiation balance that determines what the temperature of the Earth is, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think that it's the sunlight coming in that determines how warm things are going to get. Weather creates a greenhouse effect, which is mostly water vapor and clouds, and in other words, the weather has control over the greenhouse effect, and if we add CO2, I think the weather is going to change slightly in order to reduce the warming from that extra CO2.